in tonight's show to the one and only, the great champion for change, Mr. Walter P. Carter. He is a World War II veteran and a major figure in the molding and shaping of our city of Baltimore and the Maryland region at large. He let freedom rise down through the Eastern Shore. He was one of the Maryland coordinators for the March on Washington. I mean, if I was to sit here and just continue to talk about the great things that this man did in Baltimore, I would be here all night. But I want to say that I'm honored to say when you look him up and say he was a civil rights activist. But we understand differently in our disciplines as Africans in America. He is, because his legacy continues to live on. And we want to say tonight, as always on the Chop Shop, we thank you, Walter P. Carter, for your contribution to what makes Baltimore what it is tonight. We thank you for leaving us this great champion and shero that continues to carry on your legacy. And we salute you, hoping that we live up to the promise of all of the work that you invested. So young dudes like me, let me tell y'all a real testimony. I was that troubled kid in school. They took me right down, I believe it was on Fair Street, to the Walter P. Carter Center to try to get me some counseling and help. So when I start talking about this, I don't want y'all to think it's just because we got Senator Carter on here tonight. This man's legacy has been a contributor to getting me from being that knucklehead kid to someone that hopes to be a productive citizen at this stage and age in my life. So again, we are honored to say we salute the great man, Walter P. Carter, for all of his great work. And we pray that our work lives up to and into the great legacy that you left for us. Salute, champion for change. Now, we're going to move right into the segment that everybody is here for. I see we got nice viewership right now, but I want y'all to like, love, comment, and share this broadcast, because tonight we are going to be having a very critical dialogue with just one of the voices in Baltimore that is unafraid, unapologetic, and unashamed of being a champion for the people of Baltimore. She's the former director of the Baltimore City Office of Civil Rights. She's a former delegate, currently Maryland State Senator, and we just want to go ahead and bring her on. Y'all help me salute the great champion, great shero, the awesome Miss Jill Carter.
Hey, Pastor McKinstry and everybody. Thank you so much.
We are so grateful to
Carter, I just see Daddy.
Huh?
When you show Walter P. Carter, I see Daddy.
And we're going to talk about it tonight. I'm just honored to have you with us. And I literally, that's my real story. For a while, I was a distant admirer of who you were. And I can remember, I think it was 2 mayor's races ago, before we got to really know each other, jumping in your inbox, like, look, I need you to run for mayor. You who we need. We did not have the great working relationship that we have now. So going from being an honor, being a person that has admired your work, from a distance to somebody that has to work with you, only to find that you really live up to all of the hype in the billing. Like, you really are who they say you are. I'm honored to have you on the Chop Shop tonight.
Thank you. I'm glad you feel that way.
Yes, I absolutely do. And we're going to jump right into it, because tonight we are having a very critical dialogue around racial disparity and inequity in America, but moreover on the Baltimore front. If you have been watching the news in any form lately, you have seen this champion for the people be very vocal in the very popular Uzo Bay story, the Atlas Group and all of that sort of thing. Can you talk to us about just your heart and your passion for racial disparity, to champion the cause of racial disparity in Baltimore?
Yeah, thank you. So you brought up my dad. He died when I was really little, but I was always keenly aware that he dedicated his entire life to the cause of freedom, justice, and equality. And I figured the whole reason that I was even born was to carry that on, since he died so young. And so I went about the business of growing up. And then, you know, I grew up and became an adult in a city that hadn't progressed enough, frankly, since the time of my father's fighting for justice. We had legal desegregation but we didn't have power, we didn't have equality, and we still don't. And so when I saw young 9-year-old Dallas Green and the viral video of his being discriminated against downtown, it just conjured up memories for me of discrimination. Things that I've witnessed myself at Atlas restaurants, things I've witnessed outside of Atlas restaurants. And so what I think this is a call for us and a moment for us to create a movement for racial equality in Baltimore City, for racial equality in public accommodations, beyond the racist Atlas group, which I will not argue with anybody, okay? Atlas is a racist company. The owners were definitely responsible for the racist acts of all managers and employees, and for denying access from Black people in Baltimore City under the pretext of a dress code. And so I don't think that the right response to that, given the moment that we're in, I don't think the right response is to say, hey, we need to eliminate a dress code. No, that's not the answer, because this isn't about dress codes. This is about racial discrimination. This is about excluding Black people, the majority people of this city, from establishments in the Harbor East and other places where we generally don't own anything and we're generally not welcome. We're kind of treated as the troublesome presence.
So you kind of jumped 3 questions ahead of me, because I was going to come to you about the response of the Atlas owners, who came out and said what happened that day was not a racist act, but you've already spoken to that. We had Her Honor, former mayor, well, always a mayor, Sheila Dixon, on with us last week, and we had the conversation, and she brought up the fact that, you know, during her first administration, Harbor East was dust. And now you see how developed that has become, and you see the companies over there. And one of the things about this conversation that I really gravitated towards that you talked about was the reality that we have a Harbor East, but Harbor East is another demonstration of the racial inequity, even in business ownership. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, Atlas has almost a monopoly down there in the Harbor East. And there are no Black-owned businesses down in the Harbor East. Very few in Federal Hill, Fells Point, and Canton. Really, not enough throughout the entire city. But, you know, with the exception of T-Volve, I don't know of any other Black-owned businesses or restaurants down in the Harbor East. It was always created to be a relatively elite place, you know, a tourist attraction. But the problem that I have, the fundamental pain and fundamental frustration I have in Baltimore, is that this concept of tourism, one, it excludes Black people because they don't treat the Black tourism entities fairly. Lou Fields can talk to you about that, and other people. But in addition to that, they act as if when tourists come, they need Black people gone. We want to see you in our tourist areas. Stay in your Black butterfly neighborhoods that have been deprived of resources for decades.
So you said you wanted to just have an organic conversation, and that's one of the things here on the Chop Shop that we really look to do. We don't have a lot of preset questions, but I want to throw this at you just based on what you're saying. What kind of institutions exist primarily in our city's government that makes these that makes these things possible? What happens in a majority Black city with majority Black leadership at the city hall level that can cause for an Atlas group or any other racist entity to dominate in spaces like Harbor East, where there should be, I mean, you would think in a city like Baltimore there would be balance?
So that's a really lengthy conversation, and I'm going to start with the broadest of all of the broad issues there. The broad issue is our general lack of political education, political ignorance, and political astuteness. The fact that we don't even assess who is running the city and setting the policies, we don't even assess them based on their background, their track record, or their commitment to racial equality, to making sure that Black people have the same opportunities or even more opportunities in the city where they've been legally deprived of opportunity as white counterparts. And so that's the broader issue. Our political ignorance is the biggest problem that we have. We're in our own way. It's not our fault. It's because politics is not taught in schools. And generally in the community, there isn't a focus on it. But more than that, you've got the Greater Baltimore Committee, the Baltimore Development Corporation. You have also lack of accountability in the Board of Estimates, the board that makes the decisions to vote on every single agreement over $50,000 in Baltimore City, whether it's contracting work, whether it's developers agreements, whatever. So there's been an overall lack of accountability, but also given that reality, it's because there's a dual system in politics. One, everybody needs the Black community and all non-wealthy people that are just residents of the city to vote for them. But in order to get the message out, there's this thing called campaign financing that usually comes more from, rather than from the people that we represent, it comes from these corporate entities. It comes from these developers. It comes from the wealthy that wish to continue to control the policies and have all of the access in the city. And so campaign finance reform is a problem. The lack of commitment of elected people that are running to the concept of racial justice and equality, and also our political ignorance. I'd say those are the controlling factors.
So let's talk about it, because this was one of the things that completely bewildered me. I'm not normally one that endorses politicians doing political runs and things of that nature. I'm more in favor of political education or educating voter education so that people can make empowered decisions. However, when it came down to your bid for Congress, I was very open, loud, and proud because of the relationship I have with you, and not a relationship that's been beneficial to me, but one where I know you're a real champion for the people. You've gotten into spaces where you've run for office and you kept your promise and you've remained the same. I was completely blown away that a Kwesi Mfume, who has not been relevant in Baltimore, let alone Baltimore politics, for the better part of 15 to 20 years, was able to come in and walk away with a Congress seat in the 7th district. It literally bewildered me. And I was, again, I don't openly and publicly endorse people. I believe in the sanctity of the voters booth. In most cases, you ain't gonna never know how I vote, right? But I'm all for educating people. You have a Jill Carter who has been a fixture in Baltimore for the last 15, 20 years, keeping your word and doing the things necessary. What's happening in the political structure where a relic, you know, and I'm just being honest, no disrespect to the honorable congressman. Maybe we can get him to come on and talk to us. I don't know. It's some people that won't even answer my invitations. I guess I'm a little too, upfront. But what happens in Baltimore where you have an Elijah Cummings get called home by the Lord? You have a Jill Carter who's been active and on the front lines. You have a Maya Cummings who's trying to do the name thing, right? And here comes a Kwesi Mfume who ain't nobody seen or heard from in 20 years. And he runs away with the election. The numbers were staggering. What's happening in our region when things like that take place, Senator Carter?
Assuming there was no cheating, which we can't be 100% sure about that. I think it was baffling to me too, especially in the June primary, where so many young people voted, the highest number of young people that we've had ever vote. And got Brandon Scott over the top. It was astounding to me too. Someone, I believe though, it's been said to me that a lot of people kind of know I've been around, like they know my name. They don't think anything negative of me, but I was compartmentalized, He's been in the Congress before. He's a congressman. There's not anybody that I've ever talked to who has told me what he did for them. Congress. And I'm not casting aspersions on he's our congressperson now. I want to work with him and hopefully I can push him in a direction that we need him to be a little bit. But the bottom line is that I think this political ignorance, as I said, so someone said to me that what happened is because a lot of the younger people that might have been voting for the first time, as happened in this election, went and they just said, hey, ma, grandma, who do I vote for? Oh, well, I used to go to Kwesi's Christmas parties, vote for him.
Yeah, I mean, I had to help my grandmother with her ballot, and to tell you how impartial I am, I did not in any way try to influence my grandmother's ballot. I literally sat there with her and watched her vote for some people. It was like, Ma, you got a right to choose. But even in the space of Carl Stokes, that's who she knew. So I believe those things do play a part in it. And it still was mind blowing to me.
It's also about so many things, the name recognition. As much as I've been around, I've also been in a district. I haven't had widespread media attention. I haven't had national publicity as both Congressman Cummings and Elijah Cummings' wife had. So even the way the race was initially pitted, if you recall, it was like Congressman Cummings, Congressman Quasi, Congressman Maya Cummings, and like some other people too. And then as I kind of gained a little momentum, it started to be, and third, Senator Carter. And it's kind of interesting because that's exactly how it played out. I mean, I want to be clear, I was number 2 in my city. Thank you all. And I was really close third in Howard County and Baltimore County. And so given the fact that I didn't raise a buku amount of money, I didn't raise adequate amount of money, and between February and June, dealing with COVID and so many other things, our campaign team kind of really just disbanded a bit. We kind of knew we weren't going to win in June. The issue is the numbers for Kwesi and Flume were so astronomically high. And that is what lets us know we have a lot more work to do.
Yes.
Educating people. Because basically, I've spent my whole career fighting against the type of policies that he promoted when he was in the Congress, trying to undo some of that damage when it comes to the crime bill and policing and criminal justice.
Well, you on Live with the Chop Shop. I'm your host, Pastor Marvin McKinstry Jr. We on every Tuesday and Thursday at 6 p.m. And tonight we have the honor of being on with Senator Jill Carter, my cousin, great man of God, Command Sergeant Major Craig Starrett said what we're talking about today. We on today to talk about racial disparity and all things Baltimore. So I have one more Baltimore question, politics question before we get into this deeper conversation about racial disparity. And that's the outcome of the June primary locally and the upcoming administration. As always, I say on this show, we praying for now Council President Brandon Scott and the likely next mayor of Baltimore, Nick Mosby, and all of those that will be coming into these offices. But at the same time, we want to hear from the people who know local politics. What would you say we can expect, Senator Carter, with the incoming administration around some of the hot button topics in Baltimore?
Well, the first thing is obvious because they're already pushing, even before Brandon Scott assumes the role of mayor, for downsizing the city council. They are pushing for less mayoral control. Brandon Scott has talked about putting a city manager in place. And what I want to say is that let's not jump on a bandwagon so quickly because we like people or because we think they're young, new, and progressive and they're pushing for change. Some change is good, maybe not all. And so what I mean by that is, okay, throughout history, we've had a slew of mayors, either white mayors or white controlled mayors, okay? So I'm not so sure now is the time, and as we look at even the future, that now is the time to give up the mayor's power. Okay, the whole beauty of that office of mayor, like if we had ever had a mayor that was really strong on justice and equity in the city, that was really about making sure that minority businesses, Black-owned businesses had equal opportunity, if we really had a mayor that had no controllers, that was saying, I demand that the schools in my city are equal to every other school in the state. We've been constitutionally underfunded, and I'm not going to stand for it. Have we ever had that? I think having a strong mayor is a good thing. And because I have not given up on that, I don't know that I'm so quick to say, I want to reduce the mayor's power. I also know that some years back, we have the city council we have now because there was a change to the 14 single member districts. As we said, we wanted more accountability. And now there's a push to change it to only 7, which means that every council person would have a larger district. I mean, it's a challenge to serve people in underserved communities now. Is that the best answer? I don't know. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying let's not be so quick because we like people and we want them to succeed. Let's not just so quickly embrace every single concept without scrutinizing it, reviewing it, researching it, and really coming up with our own opinion about whether it's the right move or not.
Baltimore is a very unique town, and one of the things that I've noticed is some things that you see working in other areas, especially doing some of the consent decree work that we had the privilege to work on together. You go to some other areas, there's some places that just do not mirror Baltimore. It's very, very unique. So a lot of the things that people see when we start to talk about change that may be working in another area is not particularly going to work here because of how different Baltimore is. What's been your experience with that as a legislator?
Oh my gosh. Well, there's Baltimore politics, there's state politics. But I'll tell you, there is change that's happening in the state legislature, of course, because for the first time ever, we've got a Black Speaker of the House, a Black woman Speaker of the House. We have the youngest Senate president probably on the planet anywhere, and he is a Baltimore representative. So we have changed from what I would call like the old establishment Southern Democrat mentality. Okay, there is a change from that. And there are no doubt each one of these two new leaders is more progressive in their thinking and more accepting of different points of views. But we still have a lot of the things in place that we had before, like the fact that these really, really wealthy corporations, through their lobbyists, fund the campaigns. So you understand that when someone has $500,000 and none of it came from you, they're not really going to represent you. You do. People understand that, right?
Absolutely.
They might show up at your graduation ceremony and give out certificates. They may award scholarships to you. They may even come to the community block party or the meeting. But when it comes to the laws and the policies, often you're not a factor. And so that's still something that we have to be very cognizant of, not just with our leaders, because the legislature is led by, be clear, the legislature is led by the Senate president and the House Speaker, and also people that are appointed to leadership, which are called chairs of committees. The rest of us have influence, but they kind of decide to set what's going to be the agenda, what are the priorities. And if you're not a part of that, if your idea is not a part of that, you're in an uphill battle to get them through.
So now that we kind of moving towards those topics, right? The one of the places where racial disparity and policy and legislation are on a crash course right now is around the conversation of policing. And one of my favorite people, and I'm sure one of yours too, Catalina Bird, just checked in and said, "Hey JPC." I have the privilege of being able to learn a lot from both of you great women who do great work in Baltimore. But you have been a champion for legislative change as it pertains to policing in Baltimore. You kind of got on me a little bit because I had some of those shows where we had those conversations, and I didn't have you on with the panel, but I think after the first time you were on with the panel, it was my heart and passion to get you on and give the whole people a whole hour plus of nothing but Jill. So let's talk about it. We got everything from the defund conversation happening right now. We have the legislative changes that needs. Let's start with the legislation, because right now I'm at a space where I want people to really understand what needs to happen in session. Because while I salute and celebrate my city, our citizens, and our police over the things that we've seen in unity, you, like I say, it ain't gonna be real until you stand with us down in session to say we don't want to be protected. You talk to us about the racial disparity and from the legislative perspective of changing policing.
Thanks so much. Well, first of all, I want to say that you had on my absolute favorite delegate on these issues, Delegate Gabriel Acevero, who has been the leader on Anton's Law, and I've been the Senate sponsor of that. I thank God for Delegate Gabriel Acevero. I just feel like finally there's someone that is similar to me, but even greater than I was when I was in the House of Delegates in terms of his principled commitment to doing what's right. And you also had Davon Love, who I look at as the #1 leading advocate on these issues in the legislature. So we have a session coming up. I'm in the Senate. The Senate, everybody, is going to hold hearings on police reform bills in September. We are in the process now of submitting the ideas for bills for drafting throughout the month of July, and then in September we'll have hearings. Now, what are those bills that we're considering? Well, some of them are bills that have sat in committee and never come to a vote, that I've sponsored, that Senator Charles Sidnor has sponsored, and other legislators. But until George Floyd happened in Minnesota, certain legislative leaders didn't think this was a warranting of a vote, which is a problem. We are happy about the newfound commitment to police reform, but let's be honest. Since 2015, 130 people in Maryland have been killed by police officers. Okay, 130 people in Maryland. We know about Tyrone West, who was actually before 2015. We know about Freddie Gray, Corin Gaines, Anton Black, who Anton's law is named for, but we don't know hardly any of these 130 people because they don't get media attention. Every police killing or police abuse doesn't get media attention. So the first thing we need to do, one, Marvin, you know this, we need to repeal the Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights for multiple reasons, but in so doing, we allow a civilian oversight entity to have full authority to investigate, interrogate, and discipline officers. We take that out of the hands of internal affairs and out of the hands of police-controlled trial boards, and we put it into qualified people in the community, part of a community oversight entity, however we want to structure it, to be the ones to make those decisions. And it's only right and it's only fair because they serve us. We ought to make the decisions about who gets to stay and who gets to go. That's critically important. So in order to do that, we got to repeal the Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights, but we also have to craft a civilian, reform our current civilian review board into an effective civilian oversight agency.
That's been an ongoing theme here with the shows that we've done on the Chop Shop. And as I said before, we dedicated shows specifically to this topic. I love that you brought that to bear, that we've got to get the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights repealed, and we've got to make sure that we get the reforms necessary. I want you to tell the people, our audience right now, what do they do to make that happen? What role does a private citizen, if you look at Marvin McKinstry as a private citizen, what do we do? We know what we want the legislators to do. What do we do to make that happen?
Well, first, please look up your legislator. All you have to do is put in your name and your address on Google, find my representatives. You find who your delegates are, who your senator is, who your council people are, and who your congressional people are, okay? Find out who your representatives are is the number one thing. The number two thing I'm going to say, and some people might take issue with this, is be a registered voter. Why do I say this? Because we get inundated with communication from people, and we have access to who is a registered voter in our district and who isn't. We have a Democrat who's Republican. And if you're a Democrat legislator, you're going to listen to your base. You're going to listen to the people in your district that are part of that Democrat base that you expect to vote for you. That's who you're accountable to. So you need to be a registered voter. You need to reach out to your legislators. More than that, you need to understand who are the leaders that you trust on this issue. I would posit that in the Senate, that would be me. And in the House, that would be Delegate Gabriel Acevedo. You also want to look to the advocates that you trust, such as there are 60 groups that have signed on to a 5-point police reform plan, including Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle and the ACLU and multiple other organizations. You want to follow them because they're going to follow the bills. And so you got to just pay attention. You can go to the Maryland General Assembly website. It lists right on the first page every hearing that's going to happen. But I'm alerting people now, look out for September for these bill hearings on police reform, because we're going to have the hearings in September. And then we're going to grapple with the legislation, and we're going to be ready to vote on it in January.
We have the power of social media that's allowing us to do great things, like even bring you guys the Chop Shop on every Tuesday and Thursday at 6 p.m. How likely is it, or how plausible is it, that we can get some more educational information sessions on platforms like this, where we can literally have some people that are willing to come on and go live and say you get yourself and Gabe and a few others that are champions for these bills to come on. And I know sometimes for some people it's a sleeper, but I think with the climate that we have now, where people are able to, because of the heightened sense of awareness to the issues, or to this particular topic, you may get more people. Even using things like YouTube, like we've got to put the information and education like out there about these things. How likely is that something that we can have happen?
It's well, you got me, and I'm sure that you'll get Delegate Acevero because we need the people to have the information and support. Also, what we really need to do is talk more specifically about the bills, what the bills do, and why they're needed, so people can really understand how these are these bills are the route to what we need in terms of the police reform. That's so you got me and you got Gabe, and I'm sure you've got whoever you ask us to get on here. We are having, I'm going to also say, if you don't already do it, most elected people have a page where you don't have to be our friend, but you can follow us. And that is on Facebook, that is on Twitter. Now, a lot of people I notice don't really mess with Twitter. But I'm telling you right now, Twitter is actually more of the ticket politically than anything else. Why? Because literally you can quickly communicate with anybody on a Twitter handle that's in the public, and they're generally going to be forced into a position of responding to you. In addition to that, I found for myself on Twitter, I tweet something, and before I know it, people in the media are calling me for a comment because everybody, the media, the legislators, everybody's following what's happening on Twitter. So even if you don't like Twitter, get a Twitter account so you can at least follow Jill P. Carter. You can follow Gabriel Acevero. You can follow LBS. You can follow the ACLU of Maryland. You can follow the Office of the Public Defender. You can follow Jenny Egan and other people that are just champions of justice to know what's going on.
That's awesome because it's got to be about the education first. And while we on this topic, we talked about the legislative piece of it, but we know one of the hot button topics right now is the defund police conversation. And I learned that comes from three different angles. It comes from the reappropriation of funds. You got some who want to just outright abolish policing. But I want to hear from you tonight around the defund police conversation, being Jill Carter, the resident of Baltimore, being Jill Carter, the senator, being the champion for civil rights, whichever angle you want to come. I want to hear where you are on this topic.
So some people have criticized the term defund the police because unless there's radical people of radical thinking or deemed radical thinking that about abolish the police or whatever, it doesn't appeal to them. But I think at this point, most people understand that the term defund the police means to take away the gross amount of funding, particularly in Baltimore City, from the law enforcement budget. Baltimore City, a $3 billion budget. The police get over 1/3 of that budget. And in addition to that, that's what's in their regular, like the general budget. But throughout the course of every year, they come back to the council and beg for additional funds for overtime and this and that and the other. So their budget is astronomical. And the concept of the defund the police is to say, hey, let's take away some of the money that's not really working for us with the police department and fund entities that can actually serve our community better. Let's fund people that can do the crises intervention. When a mother calls the police, like Kevin Cooper's mother did, who called the police because her son had ADHD and intellectual disabilities, and he was acting out, and she just wanted help, but then the police killed her child. That's what defund the police means. It says, let's put the money into mental health services and crisis intervention specialists so that people don't have to call the police as the first resort when they have these kinds of other problems that aren't really criminal activity. That's a part of it. I think another part of it is the concept of the funding that we've done to the police and is in support of this like us versus them, this militarization of police, this old way of thinking that these people, that we need more officers in the community, right? We need more arrests made in the community. I am not a fan of that. I don't believe that that's been working for us.
Not at all.
Whole thing. You see, you have more officers in the community, ask them to name 5 people on the block. Can't. And why we have the problem is because they can't and they don't know. They don't know the community. And so who do they know? This is a real big part of our problem, and you all know this. They know the informants. They know the people that they've arrested multiple times, and they can say, hey, give up something and I'll let you go. People that are just used to being arrested because there's always something that you can get them on, whether it's, knowing where a gun is, whether it's drug activity, whatever. So a big part of why we don't have effective policing, even when it comes to the violent crime and the homicide, is not only the lack of trust, it is the lack of intuitive knowledge that the police officers have, because when you're only dealing with the informant level and not the real members of the community, you're misled. You're always searching for the gun behind the building and not why did Johnny shoot Joe? So that's a big part of our problem.
That is like one of the best breakdowns that I've heard. Where is Senator Jill Carter, or Jill Carter, the Baltimore City resident? Where are you on this topic? What is and it's not for you to take a political stance, but what do you see the viable options for Baltimore being as it pertains to our police funding, which is huge, and the 30% clearance rate that we get out of the homicide division by itself?
Well, I mean, I've always been a fan. It's not new, and it's not really casting aspersions on our current commissioner, who I think is a good man. But I am a fan. Like, if I were mayor, I would appoint a head of the police department that is from here, committed to this place, in love with Baltimore and the people, and also who has evolved into a policing philosophy that is akin to basically being a peace officer or dispersing peace officers throughout the community to do the work that we have to fund other organizations to do, which is violence intervention and prevention. That's what peace officers could do. Get in front of issues instead of always being on the back end after the homicide has happened. And I think that also we need to probably get out of this concept of having this one human being that's running the whole show. There are so many people that have experience and knowledge about what policing should look like that are available to train and retrain law enforcement. I think we should actually have some type of maybe a policing board. I would put people like Neil Franklin, Tyrone Powers, Melvin, Russell, a combination of people that I believe will bring the best practices and best philosophies to getting us out of this mess that we're in.
Those are some incredible names in Baltimore. Some have been my mentors and have educated me and helped me to learn a lot about policing, and none short of what you've sown and invested in my life. You on Live with the Chop Shop. We are coming to you live via Facebook through StreamYard, and we're on tonight with Senator Jill Carter. Richard Deshae Elliott says, at People's Champ, what would you do to I think you already answered this. What would you do to reduce the police funding, and what would you reallocate these funds to? No, I don't think you got that specific. Yeah, so let's tackle that. Thank you, Richard, for your question.
Well, thank you, Richard Deshae Elliott. So basically, it's the way that it works. I want to be clear. We, the legislature, this is not in our hands. The city budget funds the police, even though the police are a state entity, which is a whole other issue that we have to address. The legislature can address that. So the mayor sets the budget, not just for the police department, but the whole budget. And one of my problems with the city council, nobody specifically that's on there now, because this is probably the best group that we've ever had, is that they say they want more power, but they routinely confirm all of the budgets and they routinely confirm all of the commissioners. But this time we saw a slight departure from that with the they're refusing to fund the mounted units and something else. But what they also need to do is go through, look at the waste throughout the department and look at where they can put additional resources to what. How about education? Because the city is expected to fund its share of our blueprint to Maryland's future, the equitable funding of education. What about treatment on demand? What about lead paint prevention? What about more money for this tenant right eviction fund they're doing now landlords have attorneys, but tenants have no right to counsel. That's something that the city could make sure happens through its renters assistance fund. I mean, there's a multitude of other things that are services that people need. And guess what? If you fund these kinds of things, you will have less crime and less people in the criminal milieu, because you have less desperate people out there, and more people that are thriving. And that's the goal, to have a thriving city.
So I'm gonna stay with Richard, because Richard is really being a rock star tonight. Richard says, at People's Champ, how has the Maryland Democratic Party establishment stood in the way of criminal justice reform, lead abatement, and school funding, which is some of the things that you talked about just now, Senator Carter, as it pertains to the reallocation of funds?
Well, they've completely stood in the way. There's been no political will to do right by lead poisoning victims. And one of the greatest atrocities of our entire city and state is our failure. And I'm going to talk to us. It's our failure. We've allowed politicians to be in office and sit up there and be in bed with the Property Owners Association, be in bed with the lead paint companies. There is no reason why a 100% preventable scourge on humanity is allowed to exist. We could have been abated the lead, but here's what we have to do now. We have to hold everybody that's in elected office accountable to, one, buying into this market share liability concept, where paint companies that were aware they were destroying lives are now able to be held accountable by passing legislation that will allow people to go into court and hold them accountable. I mean, the big problem we have now that society has evolved is we have some landowners or some landlords that aren't rich people. They're not the old slumlords. They're like single rich people who don't have a lot of money. And they're like, why does this all this on me? Well, if we could hold the paint companies accountable, we could help even those not less culpable people. We got to end lead poisoning, and that ought to be a #1 demand that our community has for everybody in elected office. What the other things? What did you say, Richard? Oh, criminals.
You said that they stood in the Democratic Party establishment stood in the way of criminal justice reform and school funding.
So Richard may know that, and some of you, well, not everybody, many people don't know. In 2016, 99% of my reason for resigning from the House of Delegates was because of the Democrat leadership refusal to acknowledge the humanity of Black people when it came to any conflict they had with the law enforcement entities in the FOP. And that included me. I felt they didn't recognize the humanity of any Black people, particularly Black legislators that were championing for these kinds of changes. And so that's about 99% of the reason that I resigned from the House of Delegates. And I had a lot of trepidation of ever going back into this place. But people are giving lip service now to change, and let's hope that they are serious. And I can tell you, if they're serious or not serious, I'm gonna keep on pushing for what I know is right and try to push the leadership to do what is right. And be clear, I've said this to them, and I'll say it continually. What they've done in the past is they've listened to the FOP, they've listened to the chiefs and sheriffs, they've listened to all of the law enforcement officials, and they tell them, here's what we can and can't do, here's what you can and can't do. But who do they don't listen to the people. They never listen to the people that are impacted by law enforcement abuses. And so I am pushing for this, and you all keep watching and help push for this. We need the people's views to be considered first, and let law enforcement respond to it. I'm talking about at the hearings and everything else. Let's not have a situation like we've had in the past. We have 5,000 law enforcement officials speaking and testifying on stuff, and then at 2 o'clock in the morning, here comes a mother of a victim of a police killing. Not fair. We're not doing that anymore.
When we had Mayor Dixon on, and we were having her on to talk about a lot of things that happen currently, and literally I had no agenda to bring up anything from her past. She herself decided to interject some of the things that she went through in her fall from grace, as she called it. And I could appreciate that level of transparency because she interjected it into the conversation. I know you and I have had intimate conversations about this particular thing, but you unintentionally, being the people's champ, championing the cause of somebody that was being treated unfairly, kind of kicked off and launched what eventually became the Healthy Holly scandal and all of this other stuff. You smiling real big. I hope I'm not out of line for bringing it up, but I got you here now. You said organic. We gonna be organic. Can you talk to us about that itself and how it's, because there's a big light. One of the things you heard in this recent mayor's race is about accountability to our elected officials. Again, people's champ. Talk to us about that particular situation, how whatever you're comfortable talking about, and what we need to, with a new administration coming in these changing times, what we need to be aware of as it pertains to that.
Thanks so much for the question. So, the truth is, University of Maryland Medical System had a board of directors, and about half of those members were awarding contracts to themselves that they were voting on that weren't going out to the public for a competitive bid, and they were making millions and millions and millions of dollars. And my bill, Senate Bill 619 of 2019, was designed to offer transparency and accountability to that process. And it was discovered by me that Mayor Pugh was still a member of the board. Truly, I didn't realize that she had the whole Healthy Holly thing. That came out through an investigation from Luke, who was able to get information that they have refused to give me. But as a reporter, he did the public information thing and got it. And that's where it was disclosed what every board member did and how much money they got in profit. And what happened is that he reached out to former Mayor Pugh immediately when he got it, and her story continued to change. And he and I had a conversation, and we were both shocked, because you all remember Mayor Pugh when she was on her game. She didn't sweat. You didn't see that woman sweat. But when we were having these conversations, she was obviously uncomfortable, and that was a shock to both of us. I remember looking at Pugh, this discombobulated? How weird is this? But here's the whole point. Here we are now. What does upset me, and what I've heard criticism for, but it's insane for people to think I had something to do with Catherine Pugh. You all saw the FBI was investigating her for 2 years. This just probably sped up the process and highlighted what she was doing. My goal is still my goal, the same goal, which is to stop the Frank Kellys and others of the world from making billions of dollars where no local Black-owned or other minority businesses are having a chance to compete. That is the goal. And just the other day, it came out that even though now Frank Kelly is off of the board of University of Maryland Medical System, he was once again awarded the exclusive health benefits and insurance contract. So I'm not going to end there. The media might not care, and other legislators might not care, but I never was after. First of all, Mayor Pugh got what she got, but she's the only fall guy. Nobody else has gotten any kind of criminal convictions, and there's other stuff going on that needs to continue to be highlighted. We should be happy about a couple of things. There was exposure of the really seedy way that business and politics is commingled, and lest everybody forgets. It wasn't just Catherine Pugh, who University of Maryland Medical System gave illegal campaign donations to. It was also Governor Hogan. And I would venture that it wasn't only them. So, we got to stop focusing on the minutia and look at the bigger picture, and how can we force these types of entities to play fair in Baltimore. And they're still not playing fair.
So with one of the rollouts being a city council who then decides to request the resignation of the sitting mayor at the time, and all that came down, and we know the city council kind of jumped into action with writing a bunch of reforms as it pertains to the Board of Estimates and some of the other things that empowered, in their words, the ability for the mayor to be able to do this, and then to not even be able to force her resignation. Are you familiar with any of the things that they wrote into these new bills, and able to talk to give us a little bit more clarity and some education around what they are?
I remember last year at the time, but I don't specifically remember now. But if you don't mind, I do want to make a point about that. So it's kind of, this is the T part, the T. On Mayor Pugh, some people had speculated that I didn't like Mayor Pugh because of various reasons, but she made me step down from the civil rights office. And that's true. I didn't hate her, but I had made a decision I would never support her again, because I didn't like, one, the way she was running the city, and two, I didn't like the way she mistreated me. To be honest with you, she forced me to abruptly resign from the House of Delegates, work for the Civil Rights Office, pressured me to run for the Senate, promised me the job, and then took the job away from me. That was not right. And it wasn't 100% her fault. Some of it was Andre Davis who was responsible for that. So here I'm getting to that's part of the T. But the other part of the T is the responsibility of a city solicitor is to protect the city and protect the mayor. And so in this case, we had one of the most, people say, one of the most brilliant minds of our time. We're so honored to have former federal circuit appellate judge Andre Davis. But honestly, where was he on vetting the mayor and vetting these contracts, and every single contract that was signed off on where people had contributed money and bought Healthy Holly books and also done business and were awarded contracts with the city? It wasn't just Mayor Pugh voted for those. It was Andre Davis voting for those. His job and responsibility was to vet all of this and protect us and protect her and prevent it. But none of that happened. Not only did he not do that, but he voted for it too. So
look, you on live with the Chop Shop. We are here every Tuesday and Thursday
I
at 6
never hear
p.m.
anybody talk about these types of serious things.
We got Senator Jill Carter, and just like having Mayor Dixon on, you're gonna get the realest of the real name dropping. I have an outreach right now to Judge Davis to try to get him to come on the show. I hope that he know you good. Listen, I ain't censoring nobody on here. I don't know, maybe Shock, we need to go to one of them, the views expressed on this show, or that of the guest and not the Chop Shop. But listen, it's real, and we need to know these things. These are some of the inner workings that doesn't get to the audience that's on this podcast. We have people, everybody from the streets to the seats on this podcast, bringing very valid points to bear. And when you have that kind of inner working where you have one entity that's designed to hold the other entity accountable, but that entity appointed the entity that's supposed to hold it accountable, these are things that over the last maybe 5 years of my privilege to work in our city, I've seen head on. I've literally, like, how in the world can a police department be held accountable by a city when they share a legal department? These are the kinds of things that, it's gross negligence in the sense of conflict of interest. So I'm glad that you're bringing it up. I'm just laughing about the candid way that you're doing it. But that being said, as we continue in live on the Chop Shop with Senator Jill Carter, the political corruption that we've seen in Baltimore, I believe I can honestly say I have not seen it on that level in one place, where we have seen everything from the police department have its head have a fall from grace, and we continue to pray for our brother, because Daryl D'Souza is my brother, regardless of what anybody else thinks. We've seen a mayor who's now had to turn herself in for federal prison. This is a 70-year-old sister who we are praying for her strength. We did see Sheila Dixon in the past. I mean, over recent history, we have seen corruption in levels and on levels that you wouldn't believe in this one city. How then, where we have an opioid epidemic, we have a murder epidemic, we have people trying to survive a pandemic, can we have such strong language as it pertains to what happens with the citizenry? I'm going to bring this up and I'm going to talk to you about it, because I know you did have the Office of Civil Rights. You're passionate about reform in law enforcement. Young man who's one of my students came through my center. Great young man. I had the privilege to work with him. Very respectful young man. Zane Abdullah. He's on Pennsylvania Avenue one night, and a police sergeant, a way the original story was told, comes over there, and for whatever reason, in the midst of a disagreement, Zane decides to spit on a police sergeant like he thinks he's going to do that and get away with it, right? He gets arrested. The video goes viral, and Zane is yelling, I have seizures. I can't breathe, of the officer continuing to hold him in what appears to be a chokehold, and people intervene. Only for last week, the truth to finally come out. I was vilified and criticized by people who said, no, all of the great work that I do with the police department, I have a problem with police, and I'm too in love with young people when I said, I know this young man, and it doesn't sound right. We have the video come out where not only the police sergeant looks like he completely lied, then he has another person arrives on the scene, another officer that begins to get in cahoots with him and helps him fashion and form the lie. Now, immediately when this happens, great Governor Hogan comes out and he's talking about Baltimore and how we need to get a handle on the crime. And this is indicative of how Baltimore has just completely lost control. Criminals and that criminals and thugs language come up again that they like to throw out there whenever they have opportunity, which I believe is racist code words. When I can sneak and finally have justification to get it out there. The police commissioner, he comes out strong. All for this to now apparently be a bold-faced lie. I remember our great city state's attorney, Marilyn Mosby. She had some pretty strong comments. The news reached out to her to talk about the charges and what should happen now that we know that this was a lie, and she had no comment. Senator Carter, what's going on? Where are these strong people and these strong voices that wanted to condemn this young man and the people that tried to help him now that the truth is out?
I don't know. But I will say this. The way that we get justice in these situations is everything that we've been talking about, which is that we stop having the police investigate themselves, the police themselves. So we stop allowing a situation like with these officers to be turned over only to internal affairs to make a decision whether misconduct happened. This is where the newly created civilian oversight entity, community oversight entity, I like better, would have the ability to vet this themselves, investigate this themselves, and make a decision about these officers. That there's a flaw in the system. In terms of Marilyn Mosby, I mean, it's her office's responsibility to conduct an investigation and make a decision whether or not criminal charges are warranted in a situation. Because, and I think a lot of times we talk about these issues, people get the two confused. There's one hand, there's administrative. Is the officer going to be fired or punished in some way? Banned from ever working in another law enforcement agency ever? Or not? And is the officer going to be criminally charged if there's a criminal act? We want both to happen in a way that is transparent and just. Right now, under current law, if an officer commits a felony and they are found guilty, of course, then they are automatically going to lose their job. But absent that, there's so many other ways and things that can happen that allow them to keep their jobs. And what do we know? Just look at the 6 officers in Freddie Gray. Officers being found guilty of a felony is extraordinarily rare. 1, they have to be charged. 2, they have to be adequately prosecuted and found guilty in order for that to happen. It just doesn't happen. First of all, I don't want to talk too much, but one of the biggest issues is, of course, the downgrading of charges when it comes to officers, downgrading from felonies to misdemeanors. So downgrading a first-degree assault, which you and I would get charged with a first-degree assault, to a second-degree assault, which is a misdemeanor, and it's treated completely differently.
You're on Live with the Chop Shop. We come to you on Facebook via StreamYard every Tuesday and Thursday. Senator Carter, I want to tell you it's been a pleasure. We unpacked and dealt with a lot of stuff, but I told you after the first time you were on here, I want to be able to have you be one of those voices that I can call because you have so much insight, especially when there are political topics and things that are developing in the region, not just in Baltimore City. I want to be able to continually reach out to you to have you come back on and share your insights on those topics. We are coming down the stretch, and I want to just give you an opportunity to share any final thoughts that you have with the people who are watching with us tonight.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I've had a good time, and I hope you have me back. The first thing I want to say to people is boycott Atlas. Okay? No. We might get something later on at the back end after some type of resistance or protest, like having them fund some good things in our community, but that's not the starting point. You don't start in a position of weakness. You start by saying, get out of my city. Go out of my city. You will get no more dollars from any of us again in our city. You didn't want black business. You will get no black business. And I'm saying this to everybody, black people, brown people, and all people that believe in equality and justice and a poor racism. You should boycott all Atlas restaurants unapologetically. Very serious issue because it's broader than Atlas, but it's a starting point to say no longer is this going to be tolerated in our city. So I'm asking you to do that. It's very important. And not only that, there's no space, as we talked about at the beginning of the show, there's no black-owned restaurants down there. I mean, don't you want to like push the conversation, the narrative, to the point where the city and others feel uncomfortable without having black-owned businesses everywhere? We need to end segregation. It's 2020, not 1960. You know, end segregation. Also, follow us on the police reform stuff. You'll hear a lot of narratives. I beg you to follow the elected officials, follow Bill Ferguson, follow Will Smith, the chair of JPR, follow me, follow Charles Sidnor, who's also on JPR, a great guy, I might add, a great senator. And then in the House, follow the House Speaker, Adrian Jones. Follow Vanessa Atterbury, who was named chair of the House Committee on Police Reform. One of the several that was already on the 2015 police reform group that did nothing, and one of the 7 or 8 that it came out that received a lot of money from the FOP. So follow these issues, and together, I think we can make some progress. But it's going to take everybody staying astute and vigilant and paying attention to who's really doing what they say they're going to do.
So we thank you again. And before we give our final thanks and gratitude, we want to let you know that we will not be broadcasting our own show on this coming Thursday because we have committed ourselves to connecting with this much needed conversation on the MBK broadcast. Did we get that web address or that link that he said, Shock, the MBK Baltimore? I think it's mbkbaltimore.com that we can put up.
Yeah, actually posted the website up when you guys were speaking.
Yeah. So we'll be there Thursday, and we want everybody to come, but we do have an amazing show coming for you on Tuesday. Show, can we get the flyer up for that shot?
Yes, sir.
On Tuesday, in this ongoing conversation about racial disparity in the city of Baltimore and in the country, we are bringing on 3 powerful voices and 3 people that have taken the front on work as it pertains to racial inequity and disparity. And the show is called The Faith Community on Racial Disparity. Where does the faith community need to be in this conversation? We have Dr. Heber Brown III, Pleasant Hope Baptist Church. I hope I'm saying it, the Orider Freedom School, Food Security Networks. This brother teaches farming. I reached out to him when I was getting ready to become pastor and told him that I wanted to be able to just sit with him, that God may be able to kind of impart some wisdom. And I think I may be older than him, or we're around the same age, but he's an awesome man of God. We also have student minister Carlos Muhammad, the national spokesman here in Baltimore for Minister Louis Farrakhan, and I had the privilege to sit and to take in a heavy dose of the 4th of July's release to the world, the global release on the Criterion, and I'm certain you're going to hear some great points from that. And then we have another one of those who I fancy as one of my little brothers, but is doing great things. He is Pastor Mark Montgomery of the Baltimore Faith Guild. And these brothers have stepped out as millennials and said, we are not going to be silent. They've led protests in the street around police reform. And when many people went home just this past Sunday, they came out again to walk the streets again and literally came down to City Hall and voice their opinion on things to do with racial inequity and injustice as a whole. So this is going to be a powerful show. It's going to be a powerful dialogue. I would implore you, if you're a person that's a part of the faith community from any dynamic, that you would come on and you would offer and lend yourself to this dialogue. We had some rock stars on here today. Richard Deshae Elliott, thank you. AJ Taylor, one of my favorites, a frequent flyer and constant contributor to the Chop Shop. Curl Sanders, Miss Stacy and Abbott, a longtime friend of mine, was on with us tonight, and there were so many more. We thank you, because without an audience, what do we have to say? But you tune in freely and frequently to listen to these much needed conversations. We had our first sponsor tonight. We were sponsored by a local business known as Gifted Hands Baskets. And can we get that thing up there? I'm messing people's stuff up. And they sent us some money tonight to support the effort. We do take donations. All donations go to the show. My brother Scott Painter is on. Hey, Scott, you're going to be my first musical guest and give us some of that acoustic guitar and reggae, brother. I appreciate you, Scott. You're a great man, and I love you. Love your music. Gifted Hands. No task is too big or too small. They do it all. They make these beautiful gift baskets and gifts. And Scott, I'm serious about that. I'm gonna inbox you when we come off the air. And we do have again sponsorship opportunities where we gonna shout out your business. We'll wear your T-shirt, you name it, we'll do it. I got on this beautiful drip shirt that is one of our Black Business Spotlight owners. Candy Blue gave me this. It looks amazing. I think drip is an acronym. Doing right in purpose. Doing right in purpose. I'm gonna get you a drip shirt. How about that? Is that cool, Senator Carter?
Absolutely.
Can I bless you with a drip shirt? And as always, we want to end with something positive. We want to definitely go out with the word of God. And the Bible says in Psalm number 1, blessed is the man that walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of the sinner, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on that law does he meditate both day and night. And he will be like a tree planted by the rivers of waters that will bring forth his fruit in his season, and his leaf will not wither. Why would I pick that? Because that's instructions for us to understand that we have got to have counsel, and godly counsel ain't necessarily the counsel that's got pastor in front of their name or got some initials behind their name. But there's one thing that matters to God above everything. He said to his people, you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free. We brought Senator Jill Carter on tonight, who may have senator in front of her name, who may not be pastor, apostle, bishop, or none of that other stuff. But the thing I love and admire about her is that she is a truth teller. She gonna bring it square like it is. People, do us, do yourself, do the community, do Baltimore at large a favor. Invest in the truth. Put your time, your energy, your effort, your money, your vote, any other investment you can make it in the truth. And prayerfully, in those spaces, we get the greatest return of our investment. What is that return? We'll see the change that we desire to see in our city. Again, Senator Carter, we thank you for coming on tonight. You don't have to say you hope we have you back. I just hope I ain't got to have you back next week.
Because Blackout Day going. I just want to say that I forgot that.
That's right.
Blackout Day going.
I've been telling everybody, Blackout Lifestyle.
Black businesses, absolutely.
Blackout Lifestyle. I think the only thing that I don't spend my money on black is toilet paper and things of that nature, because I ain't found a reliable source. Well, I need a reliable source because I'm all for living a blackout lifestyle. And listen, I'm doing this thing, y'all. I spend the most of my money that I do spend with black businesses. Thank you, Senator Carter. We definitely gonna have you back as always. Thank you, Shock. My right hand and my left hand, my main man, always on the ones or twos back there, making all of the magic happen. Thank you to our audience. We will be back with you on next Tuesday, but tune in to MBK on this Thursday to hear that very valuable conversation. Shot. There's only one thing left to say, brother. KS, take me home.
can be more. There's nothing that I can't achieve if I just believe. You can be more. You can make every dream a reality. We can be more. Be more, be more.
Yeah.
I can be more.
I wake up every day and try to be more. I pray I be more. It's easy to achieve anything you believe. Like hold your head high. Girl, you got a reason to breathe. I see around mine. Boy, you got a reason to dream. Let's take flight. Get the children a reason to see redemption. We grow up in the jacks where it's evil and wicked. Where the people with success don't want to send you a visit. But we still finna make this life worth living. Now throw your hands to the sky if you feel it. Hey, throw your hands to the sky if you the realest. You got a vision, let's put the pistols away and make sure the OGs keep the community safe. In the world where the ladies crying, the babies dying, I think we can create that space to make a way for the ladies to ride and make baby giants. Be more, believe, let's play. I'm so in love with life.
There's nothing that I can't achieve if I just believe. You can be more. You can make every dream a